Sometimes the deepest wounds don't bleed. For Walter Bishop, a 74-year-old Vietnam veteran, the hurt wasn't in his body, it was in the quiet moments when no one noticed, when he was pushed aside, forgotten by a world that had once called him a hero. But what happens when the world finally remembers? When a few Marines, bound by a code of honor that transcends time, step forward to give him something he never thought he'd receive: respect? Walter's story is a reminder that dignity isn't just given in grand gestures. It's shown in the small, silent acts of recognition. Will anyone step up when the world is too busy to notice? What does it take to truly see someone? Walter Bishop's journey proves that even in a world moving too fast, honor and respect can be the things that stop it in its tracks. The shove wasn't forceful, but it was ruthless. "Move it, fossil. Go die somewhere else." The words sliced through the morning air, louder than they needed to be. They turned heads, sent whispers rippling through the crowd. But none of that mattered. Not to Walter Bishop, a 74-year-old man who had seen far too many battles, literal and metaphorical. His knees buckled, his back arched with the weight of a lifetime. But it was the way he fell that hurt most. He didn't scream, he didn't beg. He simply hit the pavement with a thud, the scattered prescriptions from his pocket skittering across the concrete like a shattered piece of his forgotten dignity. There was no drama, no spectacle. Just the quiet sound of an old man's pride crumbling under a world that had moved on without him. He didn't make a sound as he reached for his crushed heart pill bottle, a small orange beacon of life in a world that seemed intent on taking it from him. With the weight of 1,000 years in his bones, he pulled himself to his feet and limped away, the echo of the crowd's indifference drowning out the sharp pain in his knee. Alone. Forgotten. The next morning, the streets felt different. The usual rush of downtown life, people in suits, students with their heads down, the buzz of oblivion, was suddenly interrupted by the sharp hum of black SUVs. 4 sleek vehicles pulled up in perfect formation, and from each, one by one, 12 Marines stepped out. Their dress blues gleamed in the morning light, their movements sharp, precise. They were unmistakable. Every detail of their uniform was a symbol, an echo of something long past. They moved toward Walter, who stood at the bus stop again, his hands trembling, his breath shallow, his heart still pounding from the day before. His eyes were wide, not just from surprise, but from the weight of what it meant to have his past resurrected in such a way. And then, the youngest of the Marines, his face a reflection of youth and respect, reached into his coat. There, in his hand, a purple heart. He offered it to Walter. The world stopped. Everything around them, the rush of the city, the hum of the traffic, the chatter of the indifferent masses, it all faded. It was just Walter and the Marines, the old man, the memory of battles fought and won, the honor long overdue. Walter had kept to himself all his life. At 74, his body told the story of time's unyielding march, his movements slow, his back slightly hunched, his step uneven from a wound that refused to heal. Yet in his silence, in the hollow spaces between his breasts, there was a strength that came from surviving things that most would never understand. He lived alone, tucked away in a small, rented apartment above a hardware store in a neighborhood that seemed to be fading just as quietly as he was. It was the kind of place that no one noticed unless they had to. The walls creaked, the windows fogged in the winter. He had a routine. Every Thursday, he'd stand at the corner bus stop with a creased envelope from the VA clinic in one hand and a small bottle of heart pills in his jacket pocket. He'd carry with him a brown paper bag with a loaf of bread and a can of soup. It was a simple life, a life that didn't make waves, a life that blended into the background. But Walter had lived through things that made the noise of modern life seem insignificant. He had a limp that whispered of a war he never wanted to forget. His silence was earned in the trenches, where men fought not just for survival, but for a sense of purpose in a world that was always asking for more than they could give. As he stood there on the corner, just as he did every Thursday, the world moved around him. No one made eye contact anymore. People were too busy, too distracted. It wasn't cruelty, it was indifference, a default mode of urban living. And then the teenagers came. 4 of them, swaggering through the crowd, loud and brash. They wore oversized hoodies, sneakers that cost more than Walter's entire wardrobe. They laughed too loudly at their phones, cursing at nothing in particular. and they moved through the crowd as if the city belonged to them. Walter saw them. He saw everything. But he didn't react. He'd seen worse, much worse, in places far darker than this. He kept his eyes down, his shoulders squared. His body was old, but his soul was as steady as it had ever been. One of the boys shouted at him, "Yo, Grandpa, you blocking traffic or what?" Walter didn't answer. He wouldn't. He knew better. Then came the shove. It wasn't much, a nudge really. It didn't need to be more. The force of the shove was symbolic, a sharp reminder of how little value this world placed on the elderly, on sacrifice, on anything that didn't move fast enough or speak loud enough. Walter staggered, caught off balance. His heel hit the curb, and before he could right himself, the paper bag split open. The soup can rolled away, the bottle of heart pills skittered across the concrete. And then he fell. Hard. The crack of his knee hitting the ground echoed. It was loud, too loud for the quiet pain that followed. His breath caught in his chest, not from the pain, but from the shock. No tears, no curses, just a wince. A gritted teeth moment. He reached for the pill bottle, his hands trembling as he fumbled to collect the pieces of a life he had already been told didn't matter anymore. The old man was now resting against the gutter, his body crumpled in a heap. The teenagers passed by, laughing, their voices ringing out like an annoying tune that clings to your mind no matter how hard you try to shake it off. People walked by, barely glancing at him. A woman in heels stepped right over the scattered pills as if they were nothing. A man in a sharp business suit stopped for just a moment, his eyes flicking down to Walter before he veered away slightly, making sure to avoid him. Further down the street, someone pulled out their phone, snapping a picture. Maybe it was for a meme, maybe it was for awareness, but they didn't help. No one stopped. No one asked if he was okay. Walter knelt there alone on the pavement. His fingers, gnarled and scarred from years of hard labor, trembled as he picked up the pills one by one, his hands slow and careful. The label on the bottle was scraped away from the fall, but he knew the dosage by heart. He didn't look up. He didn't need to see their faces. They were irrelevant. He'd seen the same kind of silence before, years ago, in uniform, when they brought the wounded in from the jungle. Back then, people turned their faces away, unable to stomach the horror that war left behind. Now, the same thing was happening again, but it hurt more. Back then, they tried to kill him. Now, it felt like they just didn't care if he lived. As he pushed himself upright, the flashback hit him hard, uninvited, dragging him back to a time he had long buried. Hugh City, 1968. Blood-soaked uniforms. A friend screaming for help. The choking stench of napalm lingering in the morning haze. He'd crawled through mud, bullets zipping past his head, to pull a comrade out of the line of fire. Back then, people had tried to kill him. Today, it was as if no one cared. And somehow, that was worse. Derek Callahan had seen more than his share of hell. Dust storms in Fallujah, mortar fire over Mosul, the eerie silence of roads that should have been crowded with life, but were instead hauntingly empty. 2 tours with the Marines in Iraq had earned him more scars than he cared to count. When he came home, he traded his rifle for a hard hat. Now at 38, he worked construction on the west side of town, pouring concrete and framing houses that would stand longer than the ones he'd seen ripped apart overseas. But that morning was different. Derek wasn't holding a hammer. Instead, he was parked in his old Ford F-150, the rust on the body more prominent than the paint, while his fiancée ran into a nearby coffee shop to grab something hot before her shift. He sat across the street from the bus stop, scrolling through the morning headlines on his phone when movement caught his eye. He looked up just in time to see the old man go down. The shove hadn't seemed forceful, quick, maybe careless. But it was the aftermath that stopped Derek in his tracks. The sound of the man's body hitting the pavement. The slow, agonizing way he reached for his scattered pills, and the way people just stepped around him, ignoring him like he was trash. Derek didn't move immediately. He just watched. A part of him froze like he was back in that damn Humvee outside Ramadi, the convoy ambushed, the radio dead. He'd moved back then when it mattered, when it was life or death. That was the code. No one gets left behind. But here he was, sitting in a warm truck, a full thermos beside him, watching an old man bleed into the concrete, and he did nothing. By the time Derek threw open the door and rushed across the street, the old man had already gotten back to his feet, limping away with a paper bag clutched in his hand. His eyes were distant, staring at something Derek couldn't follow. The teenagers were long gone. The crowd had gone back to ignoring everything, just like before. Derek stood there, jaw tight, fists clenched, still frozen by the look on the old man's face. It wasn't pain, it wasn't anger, it was resignation. Like he'd seen this 100 times before. That night, Derek couldn't sleep. He sat in the dark, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the image of the old man's face. It felt like it would never leave him. Derek sat on the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the wall. The faint glow of the lamp cast long shadows across the chipped drywall, turning the room into an uneasy landscape. His fiancée lay beside him, lost in the quiet of sleep, unaware of the storm that raged inside him. "I was trained to never leave a man behind," he murmured into the darkness, his voice low, bitter with regret. The words clung to him, like an old wound that had never fully healed. It didn't matter that there hadn't been a battlefield in years. It didn't matter that there were no gunshots, no enemy forces, no explosions to mark the chaos. That moment, on a sidewalk in a quiet town, had felt more damning than anything he had ever faced overseas. Here in his own country, a fellow Marine had fallen and no one had even blinked. The guilt twisted inside him. By midnight, Derek couldn't stand it anymore. The thoughts were suffocating him, gnawing at him with a cruel insistence. He grabbed his phone and started scrolling through old contacts, names he hadn't reached out to in years. Bravo Company, those guys who had shared misery and laughter, who had tried to keep their sanity by talking about home, even when everything felt like it was falling apart. He stopped at one name, Ramirez. The phone rang twice before the voice on the other end rasped, "Derek." "Yeah, it's me." Derek rubbed his eyes, tired and frustrated. "I need a favor, and I need you to spread the word." "What kind of favor?" Derek took a long, steadying breath. "You remember what we said back in the Corps? We look after our own no matter what. Well, tomorrow morning, I need every Marine who can stand upright to meet me at a bus stop downtown. Full dress blues, no questions asked." There was a long pause on the other end before Ramirez replied, his voice steady and sure. "Ura." The word hung in the air, solid and unspoken, but full of meaning. The Marines knew what it meant. It wasn't just a word, it was a bond, a promise that never broke. Derek stared out the window into the night, his reflection barely visible in the glass. He didn't know the old man's name. He didn't know his story. But there was one thing he knew with complete certainty. Tomorrow he would not be alone. By dawn, Derek's group chat was alive with activity. No jokes, no politics, just a single word. Brotherhood. He didn't need to explain much. He had simply sent one message. A Marine Vietnam vet was pushed yesterday. No one helped. I watched. I didn't move. I failed him. But we won't fail him tomorrow. The Marines understood. Across the county, from as far as 2 hours away, men shaved, pressed their dress blues, and laid out polished shoes with military precision. They didn't need orders. This wasn't about rank or ceremony. It was about honor. It was about the unspoken code that every Marine carried with them, no matter how far they were from the battlefield. Never leave a man behind. Always stand for those who once stood for you. There were no social media posts, no hashtags, no cameras. It was just action. The morning came soft and orange, the city waking beneath a pale sky. The quiet street near the bus stop began to change. Walter Bishop, unaware of what was unfolding around him, shuffled back to the same cracked slab of concrete where he had fallen the day before. His knee still ached. The cut from yesterday had scabbed over. But his pride? That hadn't healed. He had almost debated not showing up. His appointment at the VA clinic had already been delayed once, but Walter had never been one to back down. Dependability was something that had been drilled into him back in 1967, and it had never left him. So despite the pain, he came. He limped to the stop, alone, his head held just high enough to hide the sting of his pride. The street was calm. A pigeon flapped past. A woman jogged by, eyes straight ahead, never looking up. Everything seemed normal. Everything seemed routine. Then the first SUV arrived. A gleaming black Chevy Suburban rolled to a quiet stop across the street, followed by another, and then two more. They pulled up in perfect formation, like a convoy entering a military base. The doors opened, and the first figure stepped out. 12 Marines stepped onto the sidewalk, not in their casual attire, not in camouflage, but in their full-dress blue uniforms, the kind only worn for the highest honors, formal inspections, or funerals. Their coats were buttoned tight, white barracks covers angled with military precision. Their brass gleamed like mirrors, shoes clicking with authority against the pavement. They lined up without a word, falling into formation. The only sound was the rhythmic tap of their boots against the ground. Walter noticed the movement out of the corner of his eye. At first, he wasn't sure whether to step aside or to salute, the weight of the moment pulling at his uncertainty. But then, one of the Marines moved forward, tall, broad-shouldered, around 40 years old, with a staff sergeant's insignia gleaming on his sleeve. He took off his hat and gave a single, respectful nod. "Sir," he called out, his voice carrying through the quiet street, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. "Are you Marine veteran Walter Bishop?" Walter blinked, his lips parted, but the words wouldn't come right away. The suddenness of it left him frozen, unsure of what to say. "Yes," he managed to say at last, his voice shaky, the weight of surprise heavy on his chest. "I am, but how do you—" His words trailed off. The Marine extended his hand. "My name is Staff Sergeant Derek Callahan," he said. "Yesterday I saw what happened to you. I didn't act when I should have, and I'm here to make that right." Walter's eyes widened, confusion freezing him in place. Behind Derek, the other Marines stood still, their posture sharp, their eyes forward. Derek reached into his coat and pulled out a small velvet box, the kind that speaks without speaking. The soft, deep blue lining of the box was a stark contrast to the gleaming brass of the Marines. "This," Derek said, opening the box to reveal a purple heart nestled inside, "belongs to my grandfather. He served in Korea. Before he passed, he told me this medal should go to someone who earned it, not just through blood, but through dignity." Walter stared at the medal, the room inside him still as his fingers trembled. His lips pressed together, fighting back the flood of memories and disbelief. The medal, the weight of it, wasn't something he could just accept, was it? I can't accept that," Walter whispered, his voice barely a sound. "You already earned it, sir," Derek replied, his words steady but filled with meaning. "And I think my grandfather would want it in your hands, not locked away in a drawer." Walter didn't reach for the medal right away. His hands hovered over it, trembling, as though afraid it might slip away. But slowly, reverently, he took it from the box. His thumb brushed the cold metal, and for a moment, his breath caught in his throat. Tears welled up in his eyes. Around them, the Marines saluted one by one, stepping forward with practiced grace and solemn respect. It wasn't just a salute to rank. It was a tribute to resilience, to history, to a man who had bled for his country and returned home to be ignored. A woman walking her dog paused, staring. A man with a coffee stopped, his phone lowering as he watched. A child tugged at his mother's hand and pointed. And for a moment, the entire block stood still. 12 Marines, one old man, and a purple heart. No words were needed, only honor. It started in silence. The same kind of silence Walter had known before, but this time it wasn't filled with apathy. It was thick with awe. The street, moments ago a blur of motion and noise, grew quiet as the scene before them settled into view. 12 U.S. Marines in full-dress blues, saluting an old man who seemed to have stepped out of another time. For a heartbeat, no one knew what to do. And then, the silence was broken. A single clap echoed from across the street. It came from an elderly woman sitting on a bus bench. Her silver hair was pulled back in a tight bun, her hands wrinkled but steady. She clapped again, slowly, firmly, deliberately. Her applause wasn't for entertainment. It was for reverence. One clap, and then another. It spread like wildfire. Others joined in, hesitant at first, but soon the sound of clapping filled the air, each hand joining the one before it. The applause was slow but steady, building into a soft wave of respect and recognition. And through it all, Walter stood there, the Purple Heart in his hand, no words left to say. Phones rose, fingers flew, and the click of cameras filled the air. In the blink of an eye, the moment was captured from every angle, shared in real time with friends, family, and the vast, ever-hungry audience of social media. Yet, despite the flood of digital eyes watching, it didn't feel staged. It felt sacred. Walter stood motionless at the center of it all, a quiet force surrounded by the buzz of technology. The Purple Heart medal glimmered in his palm, catching the first light of morning. His gaze flickered from one face to another, some young, others old, some eyes glistening with tears. And for the first time in what felt like ages, something stirred deep within him, a feeling he'd buried long ago but never quite forgotten. Recognition. And then, as if triggered by the very weight of the moment, it came crashing back. The memory. Hugh City, 1968. The sharp tang of smoke and wet concrete, the steady crackle of gunfire, a constant drumbeat echoing off shattered buildings. Walter was barely 18 days into his deployment when his unit was called in. The Viet Cong had entrenched themselves in entire neighborhoods, block by block, a no man's land where civilians had either fled or found themselves caught in the chaos. His platoon was stuck in a collapsed hotel, trapped by gunfire pouring in from across the street. That was the day Tommy Rodriguez, the youngest of them all, was struck. Barely 18 from San Antonio, Tommy had always been a quiet kid, the kind who carried a folded photo of his sweetheart inside his helmet liner. And then, in a moment of nothing but noise and chaos, it happened. 1 second, Tommy was laughing. The next, the world exploded around him. The blast tore into his chest, and suddenly his blood soaked through his flak vest. The corpsman was too far away under fire. No one could reach him. But Walter didn't hesitate. He remembered the rush of adrenaline, the dive forward, crawling through the wreckage of broken glass and splintered wood. He dragged Tommy into the corner of the room, using his body as a shield against the rounds tearing into the walls around them. His hands pressed tight to the wound, and the only words he could find were, "Stay with me, Rodriguez. You're going home. Maria's waiting for you." He said it again and again, louder each time, not just for Tommy, but for himself, because if he stopped, even for a second, they might both be gone. Tommy survived. And now, decades later, Walter stood on a street in a country that had once turned its back on him. Surrounded by strangers, and yet in his heart, his brothers, he felt something shift in him again. We weren't supposed to be heroes, he thought. We were just trying to survive. He looked at the medal again, his fingers closing around it tightly, as though it were a lifeline. The crowd, the cameras, the inevitable headlines, none of it mattered now. His mind was on Tommy, on the men who never came home, and on the silence that had haunted him ever since. Behind him, Derek Callahan stepped forward, placing a firm hand on Walter's shoulder. No words were exchanged, but the gesture was enough. The young Marine whispered, "You held the line, sir. It's our turn now." Walter's eyes blinked rapidly, the lump in his throat growing heavy. He gave a small nod, not in acceptance, but in gratitude. "Thank you for remembering." In the background, someone asked, "Who is he?" "What is he?" Another voice responded, "A Marine. That's all you need to know." The bus finally arrived, the hiss of its brakes breaking the tense silence. The Marines moved as one, forming a silent honor guard along the curb. The bus driver, his face flushed with emotion, stepped down and offered a hand to Walter. But Walter didn't take it. He stood straighter than he had in years. And as he boarded the bus, he carried with him not just the weight of the medal, but the weight of a lifetime spent in silence. Walter clutched the Purple Heart to his chest, the applause swelling behind him. No longer polite, but thunderous. It was as though a city had stirred awake, a country remembering. He didn't turn around. He didn't need to. The moment didn't last long. By noon that same day, videos of the Marines saluting Walter Bishop at the bus stop had flooded social media. Each clip, captured from different angles, phones, security cameras, varied in quality. But one thing was unmistakable in all of them. An old man wearing a tan jacket, standing amidst 12 U.S. Marines in full-dress blues, receiving his Purple Heart, tears welling in his eyes. The internet did what it always does, but this time it wasn't mockery or anger. It was reverence. The hashtag #RespectForVeterans began trending by mid-afternoon, and within hours it had been used over 1 million times. Instagram flooded with pictures of Walter holding the medal. Twitter threads chronicled his service in Vietnam and speculated about the significance of the moment. Facebook comments poured in from across the country. Young people, veterans, even active duty service members, all expressing admiration. YouTube compilations sprang up with titles like, "This is what honor looks like," and "They stepped over him. Yesterday, then this happened." But the reactions weren't limited to strangers behind screens. The very kids who had mocked him, the ones who'd laughed and walked away as he bled, saw their actions reflected in the viral video. One of them, Tyler Hensley, posted a public apology online, his face red with shame. "I didn't know who he was. We didn't even think. I'm sorry," he wrote. Tyler wasn't the only one. Dozens of handwritten letters arrived at Walter's apartment over the following days. Many came from high school students, some anonymous, others brave enough to sign their names. None offered excuses. All were filled with remorse. One letter read, "Dear Mr. Bishop, I saw the video and recognized myself in the crowd. I walked past you that day. I didn't help. I'll never forget that. I hope someday I can make up for it." Another simply said, "Thank you for your service. I'm sorry we failed to show it sooner." News outlets picked up the story fast. The local ABC station was the first, airing a 3-minute segment titled "A Moment of Respect" in the heart of the city. Then came CNN, Fox, and CBS, each running profiles on Walter, interviewing Derek Callahan, and airing the now famous footage of the Purple Heart ceremony. One anchor, visibly moved, ended her broadcast with a quiet reflection. In a world that moves too fast, this was a moment that made us all slow down. Even the mayor got involved. A week later, Walter received a visit from City Hall. The mayor presented him with the key to the city and announced the launch of a new community initiative, the Bishop Program, a veteran mentorship and awareness campaign aimed at connecting local students with aging veterans. The goal was to foster real relationships, not just likes and retweets. The first school to sign on was Central High, just 3 blocks from the infamous bus stop. Every Monday, seniors would meet one-on-one with veterans, sharing coffee, stories, and history lessons that never made it into textbooks. The first chair of the program was named after Walter Bishop. He attended the first session. Nervous at first, he didn't know what to expect, but there was something about the room, something about the sincerity in the students' eyes, that made him feel like maybe, just maybe, the world was changing. Noah, a quiet 17-year-old, sat beside Walter, his voice barely audible. "Were you scared in Vietnam?" he asked, his eyes darting nervously to the floor. Walter gave a small smile, not one of amusement, even, but one born of understanding. "Every day," he said, "but you do the job anyway. Not for glory, for the guy next to you." The simplicity and truth of those words stuck with Noah. He wrote them down in his notebook and later posted them online beneath a photo of them together. The post went viral, over 80,000 shares. Walter, though, never understood what the fuss was about. His life remained unchanged. He still took the bus, still tended to his small garden, still clipped coupons. But now, when he walked to the corner store, people didn't rush past him. They stopped. They nodded. Some even thanked him. Others stepped aside on the sidewalk, locking eyes with him as they passed. The world hadn't drastically shifted overnight, but in that small corner of the city, there was a quiet change. Thanks to that moment of remembrance, to a handful of Marines and to one man who never stopped standing tall, people began to remember what respect looked like again. It had been almost 6 months since 12 Marines had stepped out of those black SUVs, and Walter's life had changed in small but significant ways. He still woke up early, still tended his garden, still caught the bus to his VA appointments. But now the bus drivers knew his name. Local school kids waved when they saw him at the corner. Strangers sometimes asked to shake his hand, but nothing compared to the visit that came on a crisp Saturday morning in late autumn. Walter was sitting on his porch, his old Marine Corps mug in hand. It was chipped and worn, the emblem faded from years of use. As he sipped his coffee, a black sedan pulled up to the curb. From it emerged a young man in dress blues, his uniform sharp, his posture perfect. The insignia of a corporal gleamed on his collar. The man was lean, his eyes keen and observant, the kind of person who knew how to listen more than speak. He removed his cover with respect, walked up the porch steps, and stopped in front of Walter. "Excuse me, sir," the young man said in a low, respectful tone. "Are you Walter Bishop?" Walter squinted slightly, lowering his mug. "That's me," he said, placing the mug on the porch. "How can I help you, Corporal?" The Marine nodded once, then spoke in a tone that reverberated with quiet reverence. "My name is James Rodriguez. Tommy Rodriguez was my grandfather." At the mention of the name, Walter froze. The porch fell completely still. A moment passed before James continued. "He told me about you, about Hugh City, about what you did to save his life. He said he owed everything to you. His marriage, his family, even me. He said you changed the course of 3 generations." Walter exhaled slowly, the memory rushing at him like a cold gust of wind. "Tommy," he whispered. "I haven't heard that name in years." "He passed away last year," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "But before he did, he made me promise that if I ever found you, I would tell you. Everything you did for him changed the course of our lives." Walter sat in silence for a moment, his mind swimming with memories. Then, without a word, he gestured to the empty chair beside him. James sat down and they talked for the next hour. They talked about the war, about peace, about Tommy, who had returned home, married his sweetheart Maria, started a business, and raised 2 children. James told Walter about his own decision to enlist, about his deployments, the things that had changed and the things that hadn't. Walter mostly listened, offering the kind of sparse but meaningful comments that only a man who has already said everything that needed to be said years ago can give. For all the medals, the recognition, and the headlines, it was moments like this that truly mattered to Walter. The quiet, unspoken gratitude of a life saved, a family given a chance. The coffee was nearly gone and the sky had begun to shift as the clouds rolled in. Walter stood up slowly, the weight of years bearing down on him. He walked into the house with a deliberate slowness, then returned with a small, worn leather pouch in his hands. From it, he pulled out a silver coin, about the size of a quarter, its surface aged and smooth, the edges dulled by the passage of time. He held it out to James, his fingers rough but steady. "Your grandfather gave me this the night before we shipped out," Walter said, his voice low but clear. "It was a good luck charm from his father. I carried it through the jungle, through mortar fire, through everything." James hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing on him. "I couldn't." Walter didn't say a word. He simply pressed the coin into James's palm, the metal cool and firm against his skin. "It's yours now," Walter said softly, but with a finality that left no room for argument. "It's not just about luck. It's about carrying something forward, remembering what came before you." James glanced down at the coin in his hand, then back up at Walter, his expression a mix of confusion and gratitude. "Thank you, sir." Walter smiled faintly, the lines of his face softening for a moment. "You already thanked me by showing up." The 2 of them stood there on the porch, generations apart, yet somehow connected by blood, sacrifice, and memory. The wind stirred, the old Marine cap that Walter had always worn fluttering lightly on the table beside them. James reached over, his fingers carefully straightening the cap, almost reverently. "See her feet," he murmured quietly, his voice a soft echo of an old motto. Walter's voice was steady, filled with the calm of years lived with purpose. "Always faithful, son. Always." The seasons came and went. The leaves that had once glowed with the fire of autumn now lay in brittle piles on the ground, a silent testament to the passage of time. Snow had fallen, and the viral headlines that once captured the world's attention had long since faded. The photos were archived, the hashtags replaced by newer, louder things. But for Walter Bishop, life had returned to the rhythm he cherished. Quiet mornings, a cup of coffee on the porch, and the soothing sound of birds greeting the new day. He sat in his usual spot, wrapped in a flannel jacket, his hands resting on his knees, his gaze distant but focused. From his front porch, he could see the bus stop where it all began, just beyond the hedgerow, a small slab of concrete that had once held pain and, in time, redemption. He was alone now, but not forgotten. Next to him on a small table lay an American flag, folded with a precision only a Marine could recognize. The flag rested in a triangular case, the fabric slightly worn but still vibrant. Beside it, his weathered Marine cap, and the Purple Heart, the one he had once tried to refuse, was now tucked away in a small wooden box on the windowsill behind him. It wasn't on display for attention, but placed with quiet, intentional meaning. A gentle breeze stirred the garden he had tended with patient hands. In the distance, the faint sounds of children's voices echoed. They were likely the part of the veteran mentorship group that now bore his name. Walter turned his gaze to the road in front of him. There were no cameras, no applause, just the soft hum of passing cars, the rustle of trees in the wind, and the sky that had witnessed everything he'd endured. He took a deep, steadying breath, leaning back in his chair, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face. Then he whispered softly, "Not to the world, not to anyone watching, but to the memory of those who couldn't be here. I don't need to be remembered. I just need them not to be forgotten." And there was a long pause, and as the wind picked up, it tugged gently at the glass of the flag's case. In that fleeting moment, something profound settled into the air. It was clear. Honor doesn't need headlines. Respect doesn't need to trend. It just needs to be passed on, from one generation to the next, from one quiet act to another, until forgetting becomes impossible. In a world that moves faster and faster, where people rush past each other, plugged into their headphones, staring at their screens, it's easy to forget those who live quietly on the margins. The veterans, the elders, the ones who once carried burdens we now take for granted. Walter Bishop's story isn't just about one powerful moment at a bus stop. It's a reminder of what respect, dignity, and memory truly mean. In a world where we too often overlook those who've given so much, there are moments that serve as a quiet but powerful reminder. We might not all wear the uniform of a Marine, and many of us will never serve in the armed forces. But every single day we make a choice to ignore the world around us or to see and acknowledge the people who've given so much. It's in the little things, and a simple thank you or offering a hand to someone in need, that we express our respect. These small acts, so often taken for granted, can make all the difference to those who've spent the best years of their lives serving this country. For them, the smallest recognition can carry the weight of the world. So ask yourself, if you'd been there that day, would you have stepped forward to help? Or would you have turned away like everyone else? Take a moment and think about what respect truly means to you in today's America. Do you know a veteran whose story needs to be heard? Is our culture doing enough to honor those who served? Or are we too quick to forget? If this story moved you even a little bit, consider liking this video, subscribing for more real and meaningful stories like this, and sharing it with someone who might need a reminder. Remember, remembering isn't just something reserved for history books. It starts with each of us, right here, right now. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for carrying this story forward. May God bless our veterans, and may God bless America.